Last year, during the whole killer clown craze, a few clowns on Twitter threatened to come to our school at 11 a.m. and kill us. The school picked up on this and sent out emails to parents and planned a lockdown at 10:30. Sitting in history class, I hear the familiar sound of the lockdown alarm, the teacher rushing to the windows and door, locking and closing them. To be honest, I wasn't that worried. I thought that it was just another blank thread online, and nothing would happen, and my day would go back to normal. But there is still an excitement to a lockdown. After 40 minutes of silence, sitting on the cold floor in the corner of the room, the emergency green flashing light turned off, and the air conditioning slowly fell silent, and the hallway lights switched off. The school had cut the power. Why though? At this point, me and my classmates were staring at each other. We all knew that something real was going on. After 10 minutes or so, we could all hear a faint banging noise from down the corridor, shortly followed by heavy and fast footsteps. Someone was running down the hallway. They started banging on the lockers and screamed, "I'll kill you all, just die." At this point, a few girls started quietly crying. Then the most terrifying thing ever happened. One of the men, dressed as a clown, ran up to my class door, banging and screaming. Multiple people were crying now. One of my friends whispered to me, "We're all going to die." I started crying too. The man swiftly moved away from our door, and his screams slowly faded down the corridor. After another 2 hours, the principal came on the loudspeaker, surprisingly explaining everything. He said that just after 11, 2 men walked into the school, one holding a kitchen knife and a camera. They ran around the school, threatening to kill students, and once police raided the school, only caught one. No one was hurt. The school got over 20 buses to take the younger kids home, and the kids 9th grade and over, like me, were told to walk home in groups and call the cops if we saw anything suspicious. I had a hard week at school, thinking that the second man would return with a gun or something. But nothing happened. This, nonetheless, will be scarred into my mind forever. The second one, as far as I know, has not yet been caught. But at this point, I feel like they are not looking for him, as it's been over a year. But the thought of him still planning an attack on the school has made me a lot more cautious when walking to school. Since then, the school has hired a few on-campus police officers and have installed some auto-locking features on doors and windows. When the lockdown alarm goes off, this had made me feel a little bit better in school, but this just isn't something that you can forget about. It stays around, forever. When I was a kid, my family had moved into a new home. We were just settling into the new house and everything was going good. Until one night, probably 2 weeks after moving in, I went to bed with a weird feeling about my room. I can't describe the feeling. I just felt uncomfortable and off. I woke in the middle of the night, cold. I opened my eyes and was about to get out of bed to grab another blanket. I stopped before I could even move an inch. An old, lean, pale man was staring at me from the corner of my room, not moving. His wide, bloodshot red eyes were the first thing I saw. I was shocked. Adrenaline went through my body. I tried to say something, ask who he was maybe, but nothing came out. I reckon I fainted from fear and stress because the next thing I knew, it was morning. I didn't want to say anything to my parents in fear of seeming crazy. Stupid, I know. The landlord came over that evening and talked about the house and how it was going. He asked my parents if they had any idea about the death of a man that had occurred in the house. A shiver went through my body as I froze in fear. I looked up at my parents, who looked as concerned as I was. The landlord chuckled and said, "It's seriously nothing to worry about. It was a natural death, not a murder." I still felt uncomfortable about the death, and it made me think, what if the man I saw last night was him? Before my parents could say anything, a man walked past our house and just stared at it for a couple of seconds before saying, "Nice house, isn't it?" It startled the landlord a bit as I saw him flinch. I could hear my parents talking to the man, but I didn't know what they were saying. I was more focused on where I'd seen this man before. Then it hit me. He looked exactly the same as the man I saw last night. I was shocked, and I got a sudden hit back to reality when I heard the man say, "Don't know if you know this, but my twin brother used to live here. He died of old age, unfortunately." At this point, I really wanted to say something to my parents about the man I saw yesterday night, but I couldn't do it. I didn't want to sound stupid. Later that night, we had a phone call from the previous owner's family. They just asked us simple things like if we had any questions and how it was going. I could hear the conversation since my mom put the call on speaker so my dad could talk to them as well. I was sitting on the couch playing on my Nintendo DS, just listening into the conversation. I see the old owner has a twin brother. He walked past our house this evening. What's his name? My mom asked. The call went silent for a couple of seconds. I dropped my Nintendo DS. My body felt weak and I almost threw up. The previous owner never had a twin brother. A member from the family on the call replied. The man I saw in my room that night and the man that walked past our house that day was the ghost of the old dead owner. This story takes place all the way back when I was still in high school. In order to earn money to fund my video game addiction, I regularly tutored this adorable little 11-year-old girl. We actually got along so well that the parents ended up asking me to babysit her and her little brother a couple times. One night in particular, the parents were meant to go downtown to watch a baseball game before a few drinks with friends, telling me they'd be back earlier than midnight. Basic babysitting job, right? Wrong. Right around 8 o'clock in the evening, it started raining pretty damned heavily. We all lived in a Gulf city at the time, and storms can blow in fast before turning into flooding way fast. Once it became horrifyingly clear we were in for one hell of a big storm, the parents tried to get home as quickly and safely as possible, but the streets had already started to flood and apparently they ended up trapped in a parking lot. The irony was lost on me at the time, but not today. Anyway, the kids' parents called and we agreed I'd spend the night in their guest bedroom while they booked themselves into a motel. I had the kids go to bed, which was kinda dumb as they got absolutely no sleep thanks to the pounding rain, while I set up in the kitchen to do homework and watch Netflix. After a little while, I start to notice water seeping in from under the back doors. They had a large house with like 3 double doors to the back, so it was a buttload of square feet. I got every towel in the house and started wiping up the water and using the towels to block the door. After this had mostly been cleaned up, I went back to the kitchen table to watch more Netflix. Not much else I could do, right? But I couldn't have been any more than like 15 minutes later when the power cuts out and all the lights shut off. This freaked me out a bit, but I tried to stay calm as best I could. That's when the burglar alarm went off in the other room. I pretty much crapped in my pants. I was in a pitch-black house with 2 young kids, surrounded by flooded roads that no one could drive on. After a minute or so of almost blind panic, I realized to my horror I was the closest thing in the house to an adult. There was no one looking after me. In fact, I was directly responsible for those kids. So I grabbed the biggest, sharpest kitchen knife I could find, then went to go check all the doors. They were all still closed and no one was in the house. So I called the parents. It turns out the alarm went off when the power cut out, and I just needed to shut it off with a code upstairs. This happened about 3 more times over the next few hours. After the power came back on, I thought things had chilled out, but then we got a tornado warning. I went and got the kids from upstairs and we all hung out in the study for about an hour until the warning passed. At this point, it was about 2 a.m. and I passed out in the guest bedroom. The parents woke me up when they got home around 7 a.m. and I drove home past giant fallen branches and stalled abandoned cars. It was surreal, but thank God everyone was safe and well in the end. This story happened when I was about 13 or 14. I grew up in a town with a lot of walking, biking trails and forest area about a 10-minute walk from my house, so I spent a lot of time outside. One of my best friends, we'll call him Anthony, lived in the neighborhood across from mine. I would frequently walk to his house to knock on his door and see whether he wanted to join me in biking aimlessly around town. On this particular day, he decided to join me, and we went down to the local lake, an extremely popular spot during the summer. It's never empty. There's a trail right next to the local library which leads to the lake. We decided to hang out by the trail entrance as it was right next to a tunnel that ran under the street above, providing good shade and amplification for listening to music together off our iPods. This tunnel is probably a good 20 feet long or so, with the only easy path back up to the street above being the paved one on one side. The trail itself is gravel, with trees on both sides. No easy way to get off with a bike unless you use the designated entrances and exits. Anthony and I were hanging out on the opposite side of the tunnel from the trail entrance, so as not to bother any families getting on the trail with our music. We had our bikes leaned up on the side of the tunnel when I noticed a man coming through the opposite end, right next to the trail entrance. He entered the tunnel and once he was about 15 feet away, called out, "I'm a city-named police officer." It didn't take more than a 2-second glance to tell that he wasn't. He was wearing cargo shorts, a green tank top, sandals, and a big military-style backpack. Even from about 15 feet away, I could tell that his skin looked really greasy. His hair was unkempt. I immediately knew something bad was about to happen, and my adrenaline started to rush. I turned to my friend and just yelled at him, "Anthony, run!" To which he got on his bike and began to ride off. The man was standing between us and the trail entrance, so there was no easy way for us to take off without either needing to go directly past him or down the trail in the opposite direction. Anthony chose to try for the main entrance that the man was blocking. As he rode past, the man reached out and grabbed his arm. Anthony sort of stopped, but the man was more focused on me and ended up letting go, to which Anthony quickly took off. I knew I wouldn't be as lucky as Anthony was if I tried to push my way past the man, so I immediately started looking for other ways to run. I noticed that there was actually a small dirt trail on the same end of the tunnel that we had been. I tried to take my bike up it, and the man yelled out behind me, "Didn't your parents ever teach you not to run from the fucking cops?" The trail grew too small for me to carry my bike down, so I just dropped it on the ground and continued running, hoping that this side trail led back up to the street where he at least wouldn't be able to hurt me without witnesses. He chased me about halfway down the trail, but eventually turned around. I ended up coming out at the library and quickly ran to the top of the tunnel so that I could see what he was doing. All I saw was him riding off on my bike. I called the cops and they came to my house to give me a lineup after I walked home. I instantly identified the guy. Apparently he and his twin brother were homeless and on meth, which would explain his demeanor and motivation. They were known for stealing bikes in the area, but never so brazenly. I was just glad that the situation wasn't worse because based on his substance use, he very easily could have chosen violence at the drop of a hat. So around 10 to 12 years ago, in England, I lived in a little 2-bedroom house on a long road. It is a terraced house on a long strip of other terraced houses. Back in the day, all the attics were joined and you could literally travel through them. Years later, they realized it was a bad idea, fire spreading, burglars, etc. And so all the attics were bricked up so each house was secure. One night I was soaking in the bath when I heard a noise above me. Thinking it may be an animal or something, I just ignored it. This went on for a few weeks, only it was getting to the point I would only hear the noise when I was in the bath shower or getting changed. I got a friend to check the attic and he told me he didn't see anything. He just stuck his head inside, which just confirmed my animal story. Not much happened after that for about a month or two when one night I was alone. I was getting ready to take a shower as I was heading out with friends. I heard the same noise above when all of a sudden the dog started going crazy, barking and looking directly above me. Clearly, I was freaked out and decided to get ready at a friend's house. The next day I was outside my house when the neighbor shouted me. Now my neighbor is creepy as hell. Small, stinky, strange-looking with hint of crazy in his eyes. He asked if I was okay, being polite and trying to show him he doesn't really bother me. I said yes and went about my business. Just as I got to my door, he asked if I got to my friend's okay at first. Without thinking, I said yes, thank you, smiled and waved goodbye. When I got inside my house, I realized that he would not know I was at a friend's unless he heard me on the phone. And as I was so creeped out the night previously, I was practically whispering to my friend. Anyway, I rang family members, told my dad, and they all came round. They turned the lights on in the bathroom but kept all the other lights off. Opened the attic door and you could see 2 lights shining right through to the top of the attic. 2 tiny little holes. My bathroom ceiling was quite dark, so I never noticed them. My dad went in. He was gone a while, but when he returned, he was blazing angry. He ignored everyone and walked straight outside to the neighbor's house. We heard him shouting for the neighbor to open the door, but he was not home. I asked my cousin to go up to check it out. When he came back down, he told me that the wall separating the attics had been knocked through. Most of the brickwork was on my side, so it was knocked through from the other side. We called the police, but they told us that there was no proof he had done anything. The neighbor told the police he never used the attic and the previous tenants may be to blame. Clearly, he was to blame, the old dirty pervert. I don't think I have ever been so disturbed knowing that the dirty pervert had been watching me for all that time. I never stayed in that house again. Back when it was originally released, I really wanted to get my hands on new Xbox One X. You know the one? It was 4K ready with a considerably faster processor. So naturally, I tried absolutely everything in my power to get one as immediately as I could. My local Walmart was having one of those Black Friday sale, and like so many others, I stood patiently in line, waiting to try and beat the rush to grab one. But I was nowhere near sprightly or fortunate enough to actually get one that way. So after failing to get one in person, I then tried getting one online. But as rabidly as I wanted one to own one, the users who were reselling them were asking way too much money, and I simply couldn't afford to shell out double or sometimes triple the price. After weeks of trying to find a way to get a hold of one, I had to come to the conclusion that it just wasn't to be. It was then that I had something of a stroke of luck. Although I had resorted to Craigslist in my desperation, I did actually find someone that was selling their Xbox One X at no more than the original buying price of the console. Naturally, I was skeptical as hell. For the life of me, I simply couldn't fathom why they would do something like that. But one thought overrode all others. If I didn't put in a bid now, someone else would, and I could kiss my chance at owning a One X goodbye. I immediately emailed the seller and let them know that I was very interested. Not only that, but I had the cash on hand and ready to go. I also offered to pay for gas or whatever it would take to get the console delivered to my door. I figured that would be a pretty appealing offer to someone who I guessed was just strapped for cash around the holidays. I was stunned to get an almost instantaneous response, stating that they did still have the Xbox and were in fact still waiting for a proper bid from a serious buyer. They politely asked for a delivery address so they could bring it over as soon as possible. I was sort of hesitant to divulge such personal information and asked if it would be a better idea to first meet in public, since it was much safer that way. I'll be honest, I wasn't too pleased with the idea of a total stranger coming over to my house, but he informed me that he was going to be very busy running holiday errands all day, and that there would only be some pretty specific windows of opportunity to drop it off. It would be much more convenient for him if he was about to come over to my house. I was still not particularly ecstatic about the idea, but oh man, I really wanted that new 4K Xbox. So in the end, I agreed and texted the dude my home address. I figured it was safer than me going over to his place, at least this way I'd be on home turf. I was so happy and eager to get my hands on that new console, and that excitement only grew as I began waiting for the guy to turn up. But he took his sweet goddamn time. I mean, hours and hours passed by before I began to suspect that he wasn't going to actually show. Around 1 p.m, 4 hours after he was due, I was seriously losing my cool, thinking it was a prank or something. I tried texting the guy back, asking him where he was. Previously, I had gotten pretty timely responses from the guy, but this time I didn't hear a single thing from him. By 6 that evening, I just lost all hope. I assumed that he'd got a better offer from someone else and didn't have the heart to tell me he'd picked a new buyer. I was disappointed, more than words can possibly describe. I'd gotten myself so psyched and I can't even tell you how deflated I was. It's one thing to not have gotten the item from the store. I could come to terms with that. But I was so close to having one in my hands, it sucked having my hopes dashed so cruelly like that. But that didn't mean I'd given up entirely. So, for the rest of the night, I kept looking around on Craigslist and other sites to find a new Xbox One X that was within my price range. But as I was getting ready to wind down for bed, I heard something. At first, I dismissed it as the wind or something, that it was maybe just my imagination. But then I heard it again. Someone was knocking, not at my front door, but lightly on the TV room window. I walked up to the bedroom window and peer out into the driveway, seeing this strange-looking dude at my front door, looking around as if checking the coast is clear. I'm suspicious, but I go downstairs to see what he wants. He identified himself as the guy who had the Xbox, apologized for being so late, and explained he had gotten backtracked with errands during his day. Then he casually asked if I still had the money. I opened the door all the way, but still kept the screen door closed as a precaution. Something just didn't feel right, like at all. I told him that, yeah, I still had the cash on me, but I didn't see that he had anything with him. So I calmly asked if he brought the Xbox with him, like if it's still in his car or anything. As I expected, he told me it was out in his van. He told me to get the money and come out to the van with him and he would get it for me. I let him know I wasn't really comfortable walking out to his van, but he seems to understand and tells me it was all good. I briefly look over the guy's shoulder and see that there is in fact someone else sitting there in the van. Not only that, but the dude at my door had been keeping his hands concealed in the little front pouch of his hoodie the whole time while talking to me. And there was definitely something more than just his hands in there. Don't ask me how I could tell. I just could. You know when you just get a gut feeling about something? Yeah, that. I try to stay as chill as possible as I lie to him that I'd just go get my wallet and return in a minute. His mood immediately changed as I closed the door in his face before locking it. I then make the split-second decision. Better to be safe than sorry. So I pull my phone of my shorts and dial 911. But as I do, I heard a loud thud on my front door. Then the sound of the van's engine revving before it zooms off into the night. When I went to check and see if he damaged my door, I nearly pissed my pants when I saw a rusty old hatchet buried in the wood. I was right that he had something in his sweatshirt and that I shouldn't go out to the van with him. Be careful who you're buying from, folks. You never know who's behind the username. I apologize if there are some errors or things that may not make sense. This is the perspective of my story told from me and a part by a friend. This happened to me the weekend of Halloween, and I personally don't like talking about it, but I've been told by my friend to share it to get it off of my chest. Me and a friend were invited to a house party just for college students in the richer area of the town, so the house was huge with an acre of land and pool area. This party was themed to be a little naughty, so my friend dressed in a sexy nurse outfit, and I dressed as a belly dancer. Majority of the party took place in the house, as there was maybe like 70 people, with the house being very spacious, so not too difficult to get around. I'm not much of a drinker, but I did have some juice that was available. Some friends pulled me and my friend over to take some pics, and I set my drink down. After what felt like an hour of just taking pictures, I found my cup and took another sip, not even worrying that I left my cup alone for a while. Then a man came up to me who looked to be in his late 20s, early 30s. He said my boyfriend's name and said he's been trying to call me. That's when I realized I didn't have my phone on me. I have loads of respect for my boyfriend. We always make sure to stay in contact with each other, and since he had to work, I promised I would contact him, but I just forgotten. The man said it's urgent and said I can use his phone to call in one of the rooms. So not thinking at all, I followed the man. If my boyfriend really wanted to call me, then I knew it would be something terrible. As we entered the room, I felt as if I just ran a mile and felt winded. The man closed the door behind me and sat me on the bed and gave me his phone. I started to feel more weak, like I just got a migraine and just couldn't call. Then I was helped to lay down, and within seconds I was out cold. I woke up later, not sure where I was or what even happened. I found my friend rubbing a napkin on my tummy while yelling. It took me a bit to come back to reality, and I realized I was in a bedroom with my friend cleaning some stuff off of me. That's when I had a panic attack and just realized that I quite possibly have been used. My friend calmed me down and told me that didn't happen. She explained that she couldn't find me anywhere and assumed I went to the bathroom. But after like some minutes, I still didn't show. So she went looking for me, eventually checking the bedrooms, and found me laying in bed with the guy something out of my belly button. Apparently, he was playing shots with my unconscious body of sucking alcohol out of my belly button, licking salt from my chest, and kissing my lips. She didn't know how long this went on for, but I immediately felt sick, and even coughed up from just the thought. Thankfully, my boyfriend got off of work early after my friend told him what happened. He picked me up while my friend asked around about the guy, but of course no one knew him or recognized him. I was taken to urgent care and looked at. Thankfully, nothing was wrong with me, and the drug in my drink didn't cause any further harm than just knocking me out. I wish the story ends here, but I started to receive texts from a random guy. At first, he was just asking me random things, and I just didn't reply. But then he showed me a pic of my torso and started saying creepy things to me and even giving me the impression he's stalking me. This is still going on today, just texting me randomly. I've had the idea to try to bait him one of these days to finally have backup to catch him, but I don't know how smart he can be and what he will do to me if things don't go as planned. About 5 years ago, I lived downtown in a major city in the US. I've always been a night person, so I would often find myself bored after my roommate, who was decidedly not a night person, went to sleep. To pass the time, I used to go for long walks and spend the time thinking. I spent 4 years like that, walking alone at night, and never once had a reason to feel afraid. I always used to joke with my roommate that even the drug dealers in the city were polite, but all of that changed in just a few minutes of one evening. It was a Wednesday, somewhere between 1 and 2 in the morning, and I was walking near a police-patrolled park quite a ways from my apartment. It was a quiet night, even for a weeknight, with very little traffic and almost no one on foot. The park, as it was most nights, was completely empty. I turned down a short side street in order to loop back to my apartment when I first noticed him. At the far end of the street on my side was the silhouette of a man dancing. It was a strange dance, similar to a waltz, but he finished each box with an odd forward stride. I guess you could say he was dance-walking, headed straight for me. Deciding he was probably drunk, I stepped as close as I could to the road to give him the majority of the sidewalk to pass me by. The closer he got, the more I realized how gracefully he was moving. He was very tall and lanky and wearing an old suit. He danced closer still until I could make out his face. His eyes were open wide and wild, head tilted back slightly, looking off at the sky. His mouth was formed in a painfully wide cartoon of a smile. Between the eyes and the smile, I decided to cross the street before he danced any closer. I took my eyes off of him to cross the empty street. As I reached the other side, I glanced back and then stopped dead in my tracks. He had stopped dancing and was standing with one foot in the street, perfectly parallel to me. He was facing me but still looking skyward, smile still wide on his lips. I was completely and utterly unnerved by this. I started walking again but kept my eyes on the man. He didn't move. Once I had put about half a block between us, I turned away from him for a moment to watch the sidewalk in front of me. The street and sidewalk ahead of me were completely empty. Still unnerved, I looked back to where he had been standing to find him gone. For the briefest of moments, I felt relieved until I noticed him. He had crossed the street and was now slightly crouched down. I couldn't tell for sure due to the distance and the shadows, but I was certain he was facing me. I had looked away from him for no more than 10 seconds, so it was clear that he had moved fast. I was so shocked that I stood there for some time staring at him, and then he started moving toward me again. He took giant, exaggerated, tiptoed steps, as if he were a cartoon character sneaking up on someone, except he was moving very, very quickly. I'd like to say at this point I ran away or pulled out my pepper spray or my cell phone or anything at all, but I didn't. I just stood there, completely frozen, as the smiling man crept toward me, and then he stopped again, about a car length away from me, still smiling his smile, still looking to the sky. When I finally found my voice, I blurted out the first thing that came to mind. What I meant to ask was, "What the fuck do you want?" in an angry, commanding tone. What came out was a whimper. What the fuck? Regardless of whether or not humans can smell fear, they can certainly hear it. I heard it in my own voice, and that only made me more afraid. But he didn't react to it at all. He just stood there smiling. And then, after what felt like forever, he turned around, very slowly, and started dance-walking away. Just like that. Not wanting to turn my back to him again, I just watched him go, until he was far enough away to almost be out of sight. And then I realized something. He wasn't moving away anymore, nor was he dancing. I watched in horror as the distant shape of him grew larger and larger. He was coming back my way. And this time he was running. I ran too. I ran until I was off of the side road and back onto a better lit road with sparse traffic. Looking behind me then, he was nowhere to be found. The rest of the way home, I kept glancing over my shoulder, always expecting to see his stupid smile, but he was never there. I lived in that city for 6 months after that night, and I never went out for another walk. There was something about his face that always haunted me. He didn't look drunk, he didn't look high. He looked completely and utterly insane, and that's a very, very scary thing to see. All right, here we go. Nearly a year ago now, on Christmas, I was at my dad's with some of my siblings. We celebrated Christmas, and then after dinner, my dad headed off to be with his girlfriend at her apartment. Left in the house were my 16-year-old uncle, my 16-year older brother, me, who was 15, and the youngest, who was a toddler. I woke up early the next morning, the day after Christmas, and sat on the floor beside an outlet on my tablet. Everyone else was still sleeping, and then I heard banging on the back door. I thought it was my dad coming back, but the banging got louder and went on for too long. For lack of a better term, I disassociated, didn't know what to do, and couldn't move until I heard the back door break. I had been paranoid about home invasion due to our area in the city before, but I had no idea what to do and just stood there in shock. I put down my tablet and picked up a nearby flashlight, I think to throw at whoever broke in. When the back door had given out, I heard him go quickly through the downstairs, stomp up the stairs, and then he was right outside of the door of the room I was in. The man opened the door, turned left, and then turned right, where he saw me sitting on the floor beside the outlet less than 3 feet away from him. He was taller than my dad, and wore completely black and a ski mask. He held a big, rusty-ish crowbar that had a blue handle. He was wide and looked on the older side. I took a small breath and screamed louder than I ever have, and I held it for at least 20 seconds. Once I screamed, he screamed a bit too, and then ran downstairs and out of the house. I went to the top of the staircase after he was already down them and out the hallway, and I yelled, "Please leave," as loud as I had screamed less than a second before. Looking back, asking a house invader to leave is useless, because he already was leaving, and also because he broke in, but I wasn't thinking the best. My screaming woke up my uncle and my older brother. I wasn't wearing pants, so I put pants on quicker than I ever have, while telling my older brother what just happened as he was half awake and confused. I ran downstairs and my uncle had just come from his room in the basement. I quickly told him someone had broken in and left after I screamed. He already had a knife and told me to grab one too. I did, and after making sure the robber had left the house and checking quickly on the toddler who was somehow still sleeping, my uncle told me to guard the back door and stab anyone who comes through while he checked the area outside the neighborhood to see if the robber was gone or where he went. I held the knife and stood beside the broken back door, knowing if someone came back I couldn't do anything, as I have never fought, and I'm a child holding a kitchen knife, so I just held the knife in hopes they wouldn't come back, and they didn't. My uncle came back and said they must have had a driver, since no way could he get away that fast on foot. None of us had phones, so my older brother called my dad over Instagram on a tablet to tell him what happened. We explained what happened, and when Dad was 10 minutes away via car and he hung up. While we all sat and waited for my dad, we talked and realized this was likely all planned. The invader came in when there was no car in the driveway, and after entering, he ran directly upstairs, ignoring the new Christmas presents, an alcohol collection, and even 2 gaming consoles smack dab in the middle of the living room that he ran through. He went directly for my dad's room, where me and my older brother were. My dad collects valuable shoes and has some expensive watches he keeps in his closet, and only someone friends with my dad who'd been in the house before could have done it, and knew the right place to go. When my dad came back, he asked me over and over about how the intruder looked, and I told him again and again while he and my uncle tried to think of which friend it could have been. I was the only one who saw the guy, and had been less than 3 feet away from me. I was in direct physical danger from some stranger I'd ever met. We didn't call the cops, as the police in our area and city are known for being more than unhelpful. As Christmas is getting closer again, I'm worried about being back there around the same time the person broke in. I've had a harder time sleeping and I've been more paranoid. I understand I was and am very, very lucky that I wasn't hurt, and all we got was a broken back door, but I still honestly hate the person who broke in. I hope wherever he is, nobody likes him. Hi everybody. So here's my story, for context. I live away from home for school while my sister lives at home with our parents. Also, both our rooms face the street and are right next to each other. Also, I have a full-length mirror in my room opposite the window, so if I looked in the mirror, I'd see what was in the window. So around Thanksgiving of 2021, I had just gotten home from school and was relishing my ability to stay up late, and so was my sister. After our parents went to sleep, I was just laying on my bed watching YouTube. I had my window blinds open, and for some reason I felt the urge to look up, so I look in the mirror. Outside, someone pops up from below the window and bangs on my window super loud 3 times, then sprints away. I am shaking, on the verge of tears. I run to my sister's room and explain what has happened. She is shaken up, but we chalked it up to a dumb teenager. Just a few nights later at midnight, I see a text from my sister. "Did you hear that? There was somebody in the window." I felt that same fear. I take my headphones off and begin the get up when I hear 5 super loud bangs come from my sister's room. I run over and she looks really shaken. She says, "He just ran to the side of the house, the wall that's right next to my bed, and he banged on my wall, right where my head is." We both were frozen with fear. We made theories on who it was, but neither of us was the type to have enemies. There were no teenagers on our street. None of this made sense. Sometimes I feel that same chill in the air, and sometimes I think I hear banging. The fear of seeing a face in the window isn't as rare as many would hope. So I'm praying I never meet this boy ever again.